6 people told me the same thing before they died. 6. In 11 months. Different families, different counties. Some of them hadn't spoken a full sentence in weeks. Every single one of them gave me a number, and the numbers were going down. I want to be very clear about something before I go any further, because I know how this sounds. I am a hospice nurse. I have sat with more dying people than most funeral directors. I know what terminal agitation looks like. I know what happens to the brain in the last 72 hours. The reaching, the talking to people who aren't in the room. The mother who's been dead 40 years, suddenly standing at the foot of the bed. I have never been frightened by any of it. Not once. Not in 11 years. I was frightened by the numbers. My name is Simone. I'm 34 years old. I work nights in the Low Country, outside Charleston. And I'm telling you this because I've reached the point where keeping it to myself has started costing me more than saying it out loud. But I have to start somewhere else, 25 years back. When my grandmother died, I was 9 years old. The house filled up the way houses do down here. Aunties in the kitchen, foil pans, men out on the porch not saying much. And before any of that, before anyone was allowed inside, my mother and my Aunt Verline went room to room with bed sheets and covered every mirror in that house. Everyone. The bathroom, the hall, the little oval mirror on my grandmother's dresser that I used to stand on my toes to see myself in. I asked why. My Aunt Verline told me it was so my grandmother wouldn't get confused about which way to go. I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say about a woman who'd never been confused about anything in her life. That night, I got up to use the bathroom, and I stopped in the hallway in front of the covered mirror. I was 9. Nobody was awake, and I did what any 9-year-old would do. I lifted the corner of the sheet. I only looked for a second, maybe 2. I saw myself, just myself, in a hallway, in the dark, in a nightgown. And I want to be honest with you because if I start dressing this up, you'll stop believing me. Nothing happened. Nothing looked back. No shape, no face, nothing behind my shoulder. It was just that the room felt different afterward, like walking into a house where somebody has just stopped talking about you. I dropped the sheet and went back to bed, and I did not think about it again for 25 years. Now, Mr. Alston, August, last year, 78 years old, lung cancer, at home, in a hospital bed his sons had set up in the front room where the sofa used to be. He had maybe 2 days. I was doing what I do at 4 in the morning, checking his mouth for dryness, wetting the little sponge swab, keeping my voice low. His hand came up off the blanket and closed around my wrist. Now that happens. Dying people grab. It's not sinister. It's reflex and fear, and sometimes just the want to hold something warm. But his grip was strong. Strong the way a man in his condition should not have been able to be strong. And his eyes were open, and they were clear, and they were not looking at me. They were looking at a spot slightly behind my left shoulder. He said, "She's counting." I said, "Okay, Mr. Alston, I'm right here." He said, "You're the 9th." And then he let go of my wrist and lay back down and died the following evening without saying anything else to anyone. Not to his sons, not to the chaplain. Those were the last words that man spent, and he spent them on a number. I charted it. Terminal agitation, verbal, non-distressed. I went home. I made eggs. I slept. That's the truth of it. I didn't think a thing about it. I want you to understand how ordinary it was, so you understand what it did to me later. 6 weeks after that, a woman named Delphine, in a facility 40 miles away, on a completely different care team, in a room I had never set foot in before that night, sat up off her pillow and looked past me at the same empty spot and said, "She's counting. You're the 8th. I did not move for a long time. I remember the sound of the ice machine down the hall. I remember thinking very calmly, she said it the same way. Not the same words, the same way, like she was reading it off something. Then I did what I imagine you would do. I told myself that dying brains do strange things, that there are only so many words in the language, that coincidence is just a pattern you happen to be standing next to. But I went home, and I opened the app on my phone where I keep my shift notes, and I typed one line and saved it. Alston, 9, Delphine, 8. I didn't know why I did that. I want to be honest. I think some part of me had already understood something the rest of me hadn't caught up to yet. The third one was in October. A man named Roy, 61, ALS. He hadn't been able to make words in 3 weeks. He communicated by blinking at a letterboard his daughter held up for him. One letter at a time. Slow, patient work. And by then, he was too tired most days to bother. At 20 to 4 in the morning, I looked over and he was blinking. Hard, over and over, at nothing, because nobody was holding the board. So I picked it up. SIX. Then his eyes came off the board and went to the empty corner of the room and stayed there, and he wouldn't look at the board again no matter how long I held it up. The numbers weren't random, and they weren't counting up. They were counting down. That's when it stopped being a curiosity and started being something I carried around all day like a swallowed stone. Because when a number counts down, there is only ever one question that matters. What happens when it gets to 0? I started sleeping badly, and then I started sleeping wrong. I'd wake at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning, every night. Not gradually, instantly, the way you wake when someone says your name, and for maybe 40 seconds I couldn't move. That's sleep paralysis, and I know exactly what it is. I've explained it to patients' families 100 times. Your body's own safety mechanism holding you still, running a few seconds behind your eyes. Knowing what it is does absolutely nothing for you at 3 in the morning, and there was a smell in my bedroom during those 40 seconds. Not a bad smell. That's what made it unbearable. It was the hand lotion my grandmother used, the pink kind, in the glass jar with the gold lid. They stopped making it before I finished high school. You cannot explain a smell away. A sound you can blame on a house settling. A shadow you can blame on your eyes. But a smell goes straight past every part of you that argues. I want to tell you about Ruby, because Ruby is the part I have the hardest time with. Ruby was the cat at the facility where I picked up weekend shifts. Old, fat, gray, entirely indifferent to human beings, and like a lot of facility cats, she had a reputation. She'd go and sit on the bed of whoever was going that week, sometimes days ahead of anything showing up in the chart. The staff joked about it. The families found it comforting. It's a documented thing. It's been written about. Cats notice what we don't. Ruby had never once sat with me. She'd never so much as lifted her head when I passed. That November, she started following me. She'd come into whatever room I was in, sit down in the doorway, and stare, not at me, at the space just behind my left shoulder. She'd hold it for an hour, and when I moved across the room, her eyes tracked that space. Not my face, the space. One night I turned around fast to see what she was seeing, and Ruby hissed, not at the corner, at me. She never came near me again. 2 weeks later, she stopped coming down that hall at all, and the staff started joking about that too, and I laughed along with them, and went out to my car, and sat in it for a while before I could drive. Then the fifth one, Mrs. Okonjo, a retired school teacher, 91, sharp as glass right up until the last 4 days. She's counting, she said. You're the fourth.
It's just that the pain is getting worse.
That was the difference. The others had said it flatly,
good care of you.
like reading a station name off a sign. Mrs. Okonjo was frightened, and she was frightened for me, and she took my hand in both of hers with whatever strength she had left, and said one more thing that nobody else had said. She said, "Baby, don't answer her." I asked her what that meant. I asked her 3 times. I asked her again an hour later when she surfaced for a minute. She'd already gone somewhere I couldn't follow. By that point, I had lost enough weight that my badge photo didn't look like me. I'd stopped eating properly. I was showing up 40 minutes early to shifts because being in my apartment past midnight had become something I could no longer do. And then, the thing that broke me open was the smallest thing of all. A night aide named Patrice pulled me into the medication room and shut the door and asked me, very carefully, who I'd been talking to in the stairwell. She said she'd heard me on the landing at 3 in the morning, talking, low, in a steady rhythm. Long pauses in between, she said, like a phone call. She said what bothered her wasn't the talking. It was that she'd stood there and listened for a while, and she was certain that she'd heard a second voice answering. I hadn't been in that stairwell, and I hadn't been on the phone in weeks. I drove out to my Aunt Verlene's the next afternoon. She lives on the same piece of family land she was born on, and I hadn't been out there in probably 4 years. I want to be honest again. I went there feeling embarrassed. I have a nursing license. I understand delirium and cortisol and what chronic sleep deprivation does to human perception. I sat at her kitchen table and told her all of it, every bit. She didn't interrupt me once, and she didn't look surprised, and she didn't look at me either. When I finished, she got up and filled the kettle, and with her back to me, she said, "How old were you when you looked?" I said, "Looked at what?" She said, "In your grandmother's hallway, under the sheet." I had never told anybody about that. Not my mother. Not my husband when I had one. Not a living soul on this earth, because it was a thing a 9-year-old did in the dark and forgot by morning. I said, 9. My Aunt Verlene stood at that sink for a long moment with her hand on the faucet. Then she said, "I was hoping you'd never remember that mirror." And that was all she said about it. That was all she would say about it. That afternoon or since, she covered every mirror in my apartment herself. She painted the ceiling of my little back porch that pale blue-green, paint blue, my grandmother used to call it, the color that's on half the porches down here that most people now think is just a nice color for a porch. And she told me to stop working nights. That's the part I want you to hear, because that's the part where I was clever, and being clever is exactly what got me here. I didn't stop. I couldn't afford to stop. Nights pay a differential, and I have a mortgage. And I told myself I'd take a break in the spring. For 4 months, nothing happened. No numbers, no 3 in the morning, no smell. The mirrors stayed covered, and I got used to doing my makeup with a hand mirror out on the porch under that blue ceiling, and I gained back 9 pounds, and I laughed at things again. I actually let myself believe it was over. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting with a woman named Charlotte, 86, very peaceful, very close to the end. Her daughter had gone down the hall to lie down for an hour, and I was alone with her at 3:10 in the morning, doing exactly what I have done 10,000 times, wetting a sponge swab, keeping my voice low, telling her she was doing fine, and she wasn't by herself. And Charlotte opened her eyes and looked past my left shoulder, and I felt my own mouth open. I heard my own voice. Perfectly calm in the tone I use with patients, the warm one, the one I've spent 11 years getting right. Say, "She's counting. You're the first." Charlotte started to cry. She was too weak to make a sound, but the tears came down both sides of her face into her hair, and she looked at me, not past me, with an expression I have never seen on a human being before, and would give a great deal to stop seeing every time I close my eyes. I don't remember standing up. I remember being out in the hallway with my back against the wall and both hands over my mouth. Charlotte died about an hour later. Her daughter was holding her. I wasn't in the room. I haven't been in a patient room since. I handed in my notice the next morning. They were kind about it. They said what people say, that this work takes something out of everybody, eventually. That I should have taken leave months ago, that nobody lasts 11 years on nights without paying for it. The mirrors in my apartment are still covered. I don't take them down. And I'll tell you the one thing I've never said to my aunt, or to anybody. I don't cover them because I'm afraid of what's in them. I cover them because I'm afraid of what's standing in the room when I look. My name is Simone. Every word of this is true. Yesterday, they filled my position. She started her first night shift.